Hello everyone, it's Daniel from TechMind Factory and welcome to this next video from the series called IdentiSphere Explorer. In this video, I would like to talk about Auth0 Actions and show you in a practical way how to use them to extend claims in tokens. So let's start. So as always, let's start with a little bit of theory. So what are Auth0 Actions? Actions are the newest addition to Auth0 extensibility platform. Those are functional services that fire during specific events across multiple identity flows, and we will see those flows in this video. So what can be done with Auth0 Actions? So Auth0 Actions let you run custom JavaScript code during key events like login, user registration, or token issuance. They are event-based and can be triggered by specific flows. Like for instance, we can trigger Auth0 action after user successfully authenticated. And this allows us to modularly handle tasks like enriching user profiles, sending welcome emails to the users once they successfully register, or calling external APIs. Auth0 actions are reusable and version controlled and way easier to manage than legacy rules and hooks. So if you work with Auth0 before, you probably know that in the past there were rules and hooks and they were replaced with actions actually. So, like Auth0 actions are a modern preferred way to customize Auth0 behavior. So that's the future when it comes to customization in Auth0, when it comes to different kinds of flows like authentication or registration. Okay, so now let's talk about some actions usage scenarios. So as I mentioned, there can be different kinds of events which can trigger specific actions. So this can be, for instance, post-login event. So after user successfully authenticated. So here we can modify ID tokens, we can enrich user profiles, and we can redirect users after successful authentication. But also another type of event is pre-user registration. So with this event, we can add metadata to the user profile before the new account is created in Auth0 tenant, or we can also deny registration with custom logic. So for instance, if we want to block registration from specific domains, we can achieve this scenario using Auth0 actions and pre-user registration event. There is also post-user registration event, so we can notify one or more systems, for instance, that the new user was created in Auth0 tenant. This can be also helpful where we want to send welcome emails to the users like, hey, thank you so much for registration, welcome to our application, XYZ. Send phone message. So we can execute Auth0 actions actually during MFA operations like enrollment or triggering MFA. So in this case, for instance, this specific scenario is when we want to, for instance, use a custom text messages provider. So we will use send phone message event, and we have to write this Auth0 action to actually handle sending those text messages using custom text messages provider. So again, another type of event. Password reset post challenge. So we can notify users after password reset challenge is used for their account. On the other side, again, similarly to registration process, we have post-change password event. So we can notify users when their passwords change or revoke sessions in other systems. This can be really helpful and powerful because you're probably familiar with the process when you use different kinds of applications that when you reset the password, there is this notification sent to you over the email like, hey, your password was updated. If it's not you, please contact us, something like this. So we can also achieve this with Auth0 actions and post-change password event. And credentials exchange. So this is more about machine-to-machine authorization. So scenarios where we acquire access tokens in context of application, not in the context of the user. And in this case, so using client credentials flow, just to be more precise. And in this flow and this event with Auth0 Actions, we can, for instance, add custom claims to the access tokens that will be issued with this flow. So really, really powerful, as you can see. Okay, perfect. So now let's discuss some of the advantages of Auth0 Actions. So Actions code can be stored in a Git repository and version. Okay, this is really powerful because when it comes to DevOps practices and DevOps automation, we can easily store this code in the repository and then deploy Auth0 Actions using, for instance, deployment pipelines, and we can deploy them to different kinds of environments and tenants, so dev, test, and production, but still we have the same version of the code for our action. Okay, perfect. We can also debug actions and get detailed information under tenant logs. This can be really helpful. So we can actually test our Auth0 action in dev environment. We can access specific logs from the action under the tenant logs. And we can, for instance, troubleshoot issues way faster than without this feature. It's possible to reference NPM packages in the actions code. So that's really powerful because, as you probably know, there are tons of NPM packages, different kinds of packages. So we can reference them in actions code and use them actually. And the thing is that when it comes to environment, actions run on the serverless environment. So you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. You don't have to configure anything. You can just purely focus on the code of the action and the logic. But also, obviously, there are some limitations, and I think that it's worth to mention them in this video. So execution time is capped at 20 seconds, and this is industry standard, actually. So, we cannot extend this limit for Auth0 actions. A maximum code size is 100 kilobytes. That's also very important. So, we cannot implement heavy, large actions. It's maybe better to split them into smaller chunks. Each tenant may have a maximum 100 actions, and it is important to know that it includes both deployed and undeployed actions, okay? And each flow may have a maximum 20 active bound actions, okay? So for instance, this post login flow can have 20 different kinds of actions attached to it. Okay, perfect. So in this video specifically, we are going to see actually the login flow with Auth0 actions, and we are going to see how we will extend token claims using post login event. Okay, so obviously there are users authenticate with Auth0, and in Auth0 we have this action configured. Okay, and this action is actually triggered once the user is successfully authenticated. And what's happening underneath, because of the fact that we have this specific logic in the JavaScript written for our action, this specific action will call external API. And here we have the user data exchange. So we are calling the external API. We are providing information about the user, like for instance, unique identifier from Auth0 and email address. And basing on this information, we are getting information back about the specific property of the user. So for instance, loyalty program number, or this can be actually any profile attribute, and then we can include this data in the both ID and access token. Okay, so here it's fully customizable. We have control over that in the Auth0 action code, and once we include this data in those tokens, we can successfully issue those tokens to the application. And in the end, application can look into the specific token, like in this case, ID token, and look for a specific claim and verify, for instance, if this is like a standard user account or maybe premium user account. It can check loyalty number, for instance. So this this is actually the scenario we are going to see in the practical demo. Okay, so that's it. That's about the theory. Now let's see it in practice. So let's see how we can extend token claims using Auth0 Actions. Before jumping into Auth0 dashboard, let's start with this demo application, so IdentiSphere web application. So here, as you can see under my profile, I see the information that I have to authenticate first. So I'm clicking login button and I'm redirected to a login page provided by Auth0. From there, I have to obviously provide my email address and also my password, and I will click continue button. And after successful authentication, as we can see, here is the greeting, hello Daniel. And also if I go to my profile tab, here I can see my name, Daniel Tester, but also I can see this loyalty number. And the thing is that this loyalty number is the custom claim included in the ID token. And to get the value of this loyalty number, I used Auth0 action and post login event. So now let's go to Auth0 dashboard to see how actually it's configured. So here is Auth0 dashboard, and from the left side under actions, I selected triggers. And here is the list of triggers. Trigger is a specific event in the authentication or authorization transaction that can be used to initiate a set of actions. And here we can see those different kinds of events I mentioned before. So for instance, pre-user registration, post login, send phone message, or post change password. Here we will be focusing on post login event. So this one is triggered after user is successfully authenticated, but before the tokens are issued to the application. Okay, so I will select this one, and as we can see, here is my flow for this specific event. So as we can see, user is logged in, its starting point, and before we issue the tokens to the application, we can add different kinds of actions in the middle here. So as we can see, I have different kinds of actions here added, and those actions are actually defined under the library. So if I click library under actions, this is actually the place where I have all my actions defined. If I want to create new action, I click create action button, and here I have the possibility to use one of the actions from the marketplace. I can choose from a template or build from scratch. So to make it easier for you, if you want to start, you can choose a template. And here, as we can see, there are different kinds of templates. So for instance, as we can see, here is the post login event, an action that will add email to the access token. But I already defined my action here. So it's called add custom claims on login. So let me show you the structure here. So here is actually my action. Let me do it like this. Perfect. So here is my source code for the action. And let's explain what's happening here. So first of all, as we can see, it will be executed during post-login event. So once user is successfully authenticated, but before tokens are issued to the application. Here we have a couple of constants defined here. And important thing is that values are stored under secrets section here in Auth0 action dashboard. Important thing is that obviously we don't want to keep, like for instance, secrets or any values like hard-coded in the Auth0 action code. So that's why we can use secrets here. So as you can see, we have those secrets section here, and we can define all these secrets here, and then we can inject them in the code of Auth0 actions. And also important fact is that under dependencies, we can add those different kinds of dependencies using NPM modules. That's what I mentioned before. Okay, perfect. So now let's focus on this code here. So I have those values here defined in form of secrets. These will be injected. And here I'm doing the check. So if the client ID of the application that is executing this flow is the client ID of my specific app. So in this case, IdentiSphere web application registered in my Auth0 tenant. I want to trigger this action. And as you can see, this is really powerful. Let me enlarge this a bit, because the thing is that I can decide specifically when I want to execute some action code, okay? So in this case, I don't want to trigger this action to every application registered in my tenant when user is successfully authenticated. I want to only trigger this action if this authentication is happening in the context of IdentiSphere web application registered in my Auth0 tenant. Perfect. So what's happening next? I have my web API deployed in the Microsoft Azure cloud, and I want to call this API. This API is hosted using Azure Functions, and this Azure function, this API, is secured with the access token from Auth0. Okay, so obviously in the real world scenario, we don't want to have our API to be publicly available. We want to secure this API that will be called from Auth0 action. So that's why I secured my API with Auth0. So as we can see, this is actually a machine-to-machine authorization. So I will be calling my Auth0 action in the context of specific application in Auth0, not in the context of specific user, because I want to obtain the access token to then call this API. So I'm using client credentials flow here. Obviously, I have to send the post request to the token endpoint of Auth0. So for this, I'm using Axios. And as we can see here, I'm using client credentials flow. So I have to provide the client ID, client secret, the audience. So for which API this access token should be issued actually. And once I have the response back, I'm storing this access token value, okay? And once I have it here, I want to call my API. So in this case, I have this Cloud Extensions API URL. So this is the API URL. And in the authorization header, I'm adding this access token, okay? That's very important. So here, I'm adding this access token. And once I added this access token, I'm also defining the content type, which is application JSON. And here is my data that I will be sending to this API. Simple data, user ID from Auth0 and user email address from Auth0. So here I have try catch block. I'm posting this request to my API and I'm receiving the response, okay? And as we can see, there is console log response data because as you remember probably, I can display those logs in the tenant logs in Auth0, so it can be really helpful. And here, if we have the response data and response data contains loyalty number, we want to include loyalty number in the ID token, as you can see, and also in the access token. Okay, and the thing is that here to include this custom claim, I have to define my custom claims namespace. Okay, that's very important. We cannot use any namespace like Auth0 or anything related to Auth0. In this case, I have my custom namespace defined, like TMF, loyalty number, and this will include the value in the ID and access token. And obviously, if there is any error, I want to log this error here and display it on the console. Okay, perfect. So now, once I have it, my API will be called. The loyalty number for specific user will be extracted. And then this data will be returned to Auth0. And Auth0 will include this loyalty number in the ID and access token. And then in the application will be able to look into the ID token, look into the loyalty number value, and make specific decisions. So that's what we saw in my profile section in the application. Once I successfully authenticated and I accessed my profile section, I saw my loyalty number there. There is one more thing I want to show you, and this will be the topic of a separate video around DevOps automation for Auth0. But the thing is that we can easily store this Auth0 Action source code in the Git repo. And as we can see, this is Visual Studio Code and my project. And we can actually reuse this Auth0 Action code among different environments and tenants. So we can use it on dev, then test it, then deploy it to test tenant in Auth0, and then in the end to production. And everything is stored in the Git repo, and we can use this deploy CLI that Auth0 provides to deploy those actions automatically. Perfect. So the last thing I would like to show you is how actually I'm accessing this custom claim in the code. So this is my web application, but this time I'm running it on the local host and I have a debugger enabled. So I'm signing in here. I have to provide my user name, obviously, like this. I have to provide my password. And once I'm successfully authenticated, I can open my profile tab. And here, as we can see, I'm checking whether user is authenticated. And under user claims here, I can check if I see specific claim. So as we can see here, we have this URN TMF IdentiSphere loyalty number included. And this is actually the claim that we are looking for when it comes to loyalty number. And once it's present, we can display it. Obviously, in a real-world scenario, we could, for instance, apply some discount for the user. And the thing is that we can include multiple custom claims in both ID and access tokens. The last thing I want to mention is the fact that I use Auth0 Actions in the platform I design and develop called IdentiSphere. If you would like to learn more about this platform, I encourage you to visit my website called techmindfactory.com and click Advisory tab. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next videos.